Happy release week for the Hololive card game, and you might be thinking to yourself, Cosmic, what are we doing with a VTuber card game? Okay, listen, hear me out. It's actually pretty good and just a better version of Pokemon. And so I had some friends in the Discord ask me to look into the game and cover it. So in today's video, I'm going to be covering all this deck list from set 1, provide a tier list at the end, and just give some initial thoughts as we're going through it. There's not a lot of great resources yet available on the English side, so with any new card game release, I always like to try to be a centralized source for new games that are coming out, so I figured this is a great opportunity, and I have 2 cases coming, so later this week we'll actually do a unboxing. We might stream one case and do a video for the other, but there's a couple more Hololive videos coming down the road. But with that out of the way, let's dive into today's video. And so up first, we do have to address that there are core staples in this game. And as I mentioned up front, it is a better or at least improved upon version of Pokemon. Your energy is no longer in the deck. The prize system no longer lets your opponent just snowball for no reason. Instead, it's a catch-up mechanic like Battle Spirits is in terms of you getting additional resources. It just does a lot of things that I like. However, again, my VTuber knowledge is exactly 0, so a lot of this I am not familiar with, maybe the Oshis themselves, but it is something that, at least coming from a very long history of covering trading card games, and as someone who played competitive Pokemon before, after looking into these, I was like, yeah, this actually looks pretty good. This looks like a game that I would be able to enjoy just mechanically. So with that, similar to Pokemon, and I apologize, the rest of this video will be likely comparing various aspects of Pokemon for reasons that will become very clear soon enough, but we do have your standard draw engines with supports. These are limited to a once per turn. One of them is a draw 3. I just love drawing cards, another reason why I do like this game at a high level. And then the manager is just a hand refresh effect. Of course, we have your Pokeballs or your normal PC, which allows you to get a debut card or essentially a basic and put it onto your stage or bench. And then generally damage amp style of cards, maybe a little bit closer to more of the Pokemon pocket style, where it is a tool in this case, but it's just something just to give you a little bit more damage to hit the right number of thresholds to make sure you are getting those one-hit KOs when you really need them. And there are a few other subtle differences that we might talk about as we go into individual deck lists themselves, but at a very high level, you will notice that there are overall staples that a lot of decks want to be running. So the one caveat I'll add here is that when I was looking into the game originally, normal PC ended up being like a $30 card randomly because it was a common that just everybody needed, and the first couple sets were hard to get a hold of in Japan. So if you are looking to get the game, the starter decks do have this added as kind of a bonus, and it is just nice to see that it is something that should be more available in the North American market. But overall, deck list pricing, as long as you don't foil them out, do seem reasonably approachable. So with that out of the way, let's get into the actual deck list themselves. And for starters, we are going to go into the Azuki list, which is if you bought the starter deck and want to upgrade it, this is absolutely the list for you. Now, what's interesting about the Oshis in this deck or in this game in general, with the leader effect, as I'm just going to call them, is that the lives can vary a little bit, but the hollow power is a very interesting system that as you're collabing with cards and putting cards from the top of your deck into that pile, each Oshi or leader is going to have a different thing that they do, different mechanic or gimmick that they rely on. And what's really nice about this one in particular is with Little Wild Rabbits, you're able to move all of your cheer or energy from your key character to another one. So this allows you to have a higher second stage or just second evolution, as it were, in this game, to get the additional resources you need to keep getting those extra attacks. Having a 4 energy or 4 cheer attack can be quite costly to ramp up. So this deck is all focused around Azuki, and again, one of the premier options of being all in on a certain character or a certain tribe, as we're going to talk about later, is you get to run key cards like First Gravity, which just give you a little bit of extra searching when you really need it. Now, you will note that there is a bit of dice rolling in this game as well, primarily just to keep things interesting, but we do have things like the debut Azuki with expanding map, and then the other one I'll note here is the bloom effect, which just means as you promote into that card or bloom into that card, you are going to get an additional effect and get some additional cheers. So This deck is all about resource management and making sure that you're able to get into those second stage characters to make sure you are hitting some very nice aggressive numbers. And then again, Pecora just allows you to get that sustain package so that you can go into second stage style attack. And what's really nice, if you do want to lean into some of the other dice roll mechanics that are available through other cards, you are able to use Pecora's ultimate, as it were, the hollow power for the Lucky Rabbit, again, to make them all appear as 6s for the course of the turn. So there are some other things you can rely on if you want additional ramp otherwise, but for this in particular, we really want to focus on the Little Wild Rabbit's ability up front to make sure you have a consistent source of damage turn after turn after turn. Now, again, I'm not going to focus too much on the other variations of these particular builds, but do keep in mind, similar to Pokemon, there is effectively a key line that you want to use, and then there's other support cards that can round it out. But a lot of the deck lists in today's video are from random Japanese store tournaments that I was able to find, and I at least want to provide a list for as many different Oshis as possible. So with that out of the way, that is Pecora and the Azuki starter deck upgraded. Now, the true menace of the format that we have to talk about is Kanata, which is just the damage stack aggro. This is a hyper efficient and consistent style of deck that can hit 100 damage when you least expect it, that is going to knock out any first stage that your opponent is going to be trying to align with, or the vast majority of them, to make it where it's very hard for your opponent to establish. Now, keeping in mind that, as I mentioned early on, with the anti-prize or life mechanic, you are giving your opponent extra energy, but with Kanata's hollow power of getting to set something to 50 HP, your opponent is going to try to build up to a certain card, and that leader ability is just going to say, nope, I'm going to KO it, and then you have to restart all over again. So this is absolutely the menace of the format to look out for, and something that we have to wait and see if there will be a limit or not. Strictly speaking, this is de facto best deck in set 1, no contest, but if we get the limit that took a little bit to appear in the Japanese format, this does become a little bit more fair compared to the other options, making it not such a menace on society that it ultimately is. Now, I do want to give a shout out here to the mascot cards, which are going to be something that is a little bit different from the Pokemon side of it, where it is a extra attach, and all these combo quite well into whichever Hololive character that you're trying to build up into. Some of them have effects that go right into it. Some of them are just extra damage bonuses, but it is still something that I'm curious from a card design standpoint how much they use this in the future, because it is nice to see that they have the mascots kind of playing the role here. And again, I know absolutely nothing about Upao, but I love his little artwork. I just want to squeeze his little head. He's an adorable guy, but again, after I looked it up and reminded myself of the Hololive 1 format, if you are strictly a competitive only player, definitely build this deck first. If you are someone who's just looking to have fun, or maybe your locals just can agree on a universal ban, just ban this Oshi and make sure that you have a more balanced format and have some more fun with it at the end of the day. But if you are someone who loves more aggressive strategies, then Kanata is going to be the deck for you. Now, the second deck, and probably the more reasonable one in terms of power level, but also just good in general, is going to be the Promise Tribal, as I like to call it. And a lot of people rely on the Mume as the Oshi that they use because it does have the Promise damage reduction built in. But this is one that can definitely be built in a couple number of different ways. I'm just using this one as the go-to. But this deck is all about stringing together various card combinations to get certain damage thresholds while relying on the number of various Promise units that you have overall. Now, we do again get the special case here of being able to run the tribal card or Promise in this case, which is great for just drawing a bunch of extra cards that we want to see anyways, but ultimately trying to get into some of the second stages to be the key cards that we're trying to attack with and close out the game. But if you are someone who wants to see more of a tribal style effect, getting extra card draw, getting extra effects that help search out your deck for the other pieces of it, and then line up multiple chip damage kind of a turn over turn, then Promise is going to be a great pick for you. Now, going into red, we have Kiara, which is the other deck that got a lot of love, at least it seemed in set 1. And while this does appear a little bit lower rated on every other tier list I could find, this one actually took a lot of spots in the Japan format that it feels incorrect to not call it a higher tier compared to some of the other lists that were out there. So in this case, we are using Kiara's archival damage effects, as I like to call it, a bunch of either discard-based options or filtering options as you're going through your deck. And then as you use the second stage, you get a additional damage for each Holomem in your archive, and then get to revive them or return them back from your archive to your deck and then shuffle it. So this is definitely one that relies on a lot of filtering, a lot of going through your cards and getting additional counts for it. There are some abilities to get additional discard-based effects. We are relying on Polka in this case just for a little bit more of deck filtering, making sure that we're finding the fans and going through it. And then for the extra troop effects with the other first debut, getting more ways to get them back from our archive back to our hand. So red does seem to be very heavily focused on using our archive, either bringing things back from it or discarding to it for additional value. So if you're someone who loves stacking up for big power finishes, then definitely check out the Kiara list, being one of the 2 red decks you can play in the first format. And then the other red deck that we got to give a shout out to is Takane. And this is my favorite. Again, as someone who knows nothing about Hololive overall, this was my favorite deck to learn about, primarily just because of the mascot. I love owls in general, and the fact that the tags on this card in particular were bird and alcohol, I just found hilarious. But as I just mentioned, where the previous deck was all about using your archive for extra damage and looping cards back, Takane is actually all about spending from your hand to get additional damage with the second stage. This is all about just discarding for max value. However, the downside here is that we don't have a lot of great ways to refill our hand. We do have the stage 1 Takane, which allows us to just draw some extra cards. We do have the Polka, again, just for additional cards searching and filtering when we really need it. But other than that, we don't have a lot of great ways to churn through our deck and get enough of the extra discard effects that we want. That in set 3, apparently that this comes a little bit stronger of a deck, but otherwise your options for set 1 are a bit limited in what you can lean into. But overall, this is a stack up, try to get your chip damage where you can, and then when your opponent tries to either promote at the right time, or if you just have the fuel for it, use the second stage for one big windmill slam and KO your opponent in one hit. But again, this is one that needs a little bit more love in future sets before it can really come online. Now, my favorite deck that I was able to find overall from all the ones that we looked at, as well as just having more options of how it can be built, is Kanaru, and this one is all about chip damage. And I don't remember the Pokemon deck in particular, but this is quite literally just a Pokemon deck for what it does, back from when, like, the Night March era, if I believe it was. It was similar to Greninja, but I don't think it's the exact deck that I'm thinking of, but it's all about just spreading damage on your opponent's board and then lining up a card in the middle to make sure it survives, which is why we're using the Vestia Zeta as a way to protect whatever we're trying to loop. And in this case, we do want to use the Muna for her Moon Knight Diva effect. Again, just being able to burn extra cards and chip extra damage, which then combos very well with the Oshi's Hololive power to just get additional damage. So very quickly, you can see where some of this damage starts to stack up turn after turn. And if we are admittedly a little bit lucky, we can rely on the Zeta to make sure that we're surviving. Now, again, the downside of the Buzz cards is that these are effectively the EX cards of this game, meaning that when your opponent is able to KO it, you actually lose 2 of the life in this case. So they are a little bit better, right? It has a higher HP threshold. It's going to be a little bit harder to remove, but there is that additional life kind of burn aspect of it that you have to consider. So keeping in mind that that is going to be a heavy Buzz focus for this deck, but if you are someone who just loves spreading extra damage and watching your opponent's field get chipped away, then this is absolutely the deck for you. And again, there is something here about the archive burn aspect, because you are churning through so many cheers. There is a green package that you could run in this deck as well to get more of your cheer back. But I think if you count your resources carefully enough and you know how to plan them out, then using just the hollow power even once to get the 5 cheer back is going to be more than enough to keep you in the case of the game. So this is actually the deck that I'm looking forward to building and testing, because I think it was a little underexplored in the Japan format. Again, after the limit is probably when I'd be more interested in trying this out, so we'll have to wait and see if we get that limit or not. But at least for something that is quite a bit different than how these other decks operate, I gotta give a shout out here to the chip damage spam, as I like to call it. And then the other blue deck that we have an example here for is a Suse, which is, again, all about just getting additional damage to the back line. This does seem to be more of a blue mechanic, and this one does care about burning extra resources just to make sure that we're getting additional damage-based effects. Now, we do have some ramp cards in the Muna effect in terms of just getting the extra cheer so we can go into the second stage more effectively, but keep in mind this is something that normally you're limited to 1 cheer a turn unless your opponent is dealing you a bunch of damage, and then you're getting cheer out of your life, and that's kind of the benefit of running these mono-colored decks, is that it's very easy just to get enough cheer or the right color of cheer for those based effects. Now, the other thing I'll note here for this list in particular, because they all have the singing tag, we can also use the idle microphone just to give us more filtering, more digging, what have you. But the interesting part about this deck in particular compared to what we have in Pokemon is in Hololive, you can actually go from first stage to second stage. So you're able to get multiple stacks on your field so you can really get the most out of that second stage effect. So this one does line it up quite well that you are going to be able to hit up those one-hit KOs, but how usable is it going to be, or how often you're relying on that one-hit KO versus just chip damage otherwise? This is one that you'll just have to determine the flow of the game and what course is ultimately most correct for you to take on a matchup by matchup basis. But in terms of having a little bit more flexibility compared to the other blue lists I just talked about, I think this is definitely going to be the stronger of the two, just because it comes together a bit more streamlined and doesn't require as many of the buzz cards, which can be a very real drawback that you might not be expecting. So last but not least, as I always like to do in these videos, we have a tier list. And yes, the Kanata and the limit card that we talked about, where it goes from a 4 of to a 1 of, is the big question. This is de facto the best deck in the format, no questions asked. It tore apart the Japan format, not even close. And then in set 2, or I think it was the very end of set 1, technically, it got announced for a limit, and then the limit took effect in set 2. But I do think there's actually a nice like trio of decks that you can play otherwise from this format, assuming we get that limitation. And then unfortunately, some of the other decks that I've mentioned just fall a little bit weaker to where they're missing a couple pieces. They do get a buff in set 2. And just from a future case, I will admit here as well, as I was trying to look at the meta or future metas in this case of where things are standing, this seems like the worst format for Hololive, and then things do gradually get better. This does happen quite often, it feels like, in Japanese trading card games for as long as we've been covering them, because the set 1 card pool just isn't deep enough. There's not enough support there for everything to really be at the same level, and there's always like that one oopsies card that was just a little too good that pushes one deck above the rest, and that's exactly what happened here as well. So I'll be very curious to see how much Bushiroad supports this from the regional standpoint. Again, I think this game is a blast to play. As I was looking up more how to play videos and stuff like that, shout out to Weiss and Chill, there was a surprising amount of back and forth and strategic planning that I kind of missed from Pokemon, that, you know, getting to draw a lot of cards and sequencing your turns in a more optimal way can lead to the skill difference that you don't often get to see, or people forget because, oh, they just saw more supports, they looped together X, Y, and there's actually a lot of important plays that matter as you're building up those turns to really get to that position where you can turn the corner and take the victory. So this is one that, again, I will have 2 cases that I'm opening in the very near future that I'll have up on the channel. I'm helping a couple friends with some master sets, and then if the ratios are good enough and I can keep a deck for myself, I absolutely will. And we might do a gameplay video in the near future. But let me know your thoughts if you want to see a gameplay video, or if you're aware that Hololive is coming out with the card game at all this week, considering Godzilla just launched last week, right? Let me know your thoughts down below. But until next time, my friends, stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.